Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. So what's been going on in the world of Mila and fatherhood? Still new. I hear it's 6 weeks in.
Yes, that is right. So 6 weeks. I was actually looking at some pictures just last week of her, and even just like over a 2 week period, how much changes in like that short time is kind of crazy. But yeah, no, it's been going well so far. It really has.
Curious to understand.
Yeah.
Are you starting to correlate fatherhood to leadership at all yet? Or to coaching, like to your work? Is there any parodies there?
There's a few things I think that come up. And I don't know if it's so much towards parenting, because like, let's be honest right now, you're not really parenting. You're literally just like keeping them alive. You're not like guiding them in one way or the other. You're not nurturing them. There's no difficult conversations that are coming.
I know.
It's kind of like, okay, change the diapers, make sure they're well fed, support mom, all those good things.
I could see all kinds of leadership in that. Right? How do you internally motivate yourself to continue to change those diapers? Well, I want to keep her alive, right?
It's a pretty good motivator. I mean, at least it should be a good motivator. So, Ange, are you gonna introduce me to the podcast guest?
Yeah, I guess I should. Another warm welcome to Scott Rust, our COO of Intuitive Performance and Emotiveer Inc. Really excited to have him back on the show again. It's always entertaining to have my business partner here with me to talk anecdotally about what's going on with Intuitive Performance, as well as our hot topic today, which is around how leadership, coincides within HR systems and the thought process that possibly they're a little bit broken, and having a little bit of debate around systems versus things like curiosity, empathy, and accountability.
So if I can recap, we're talking about HR systems that might be broken. How can we practice a little bit more empathy and being able to be, I don't want to say less of a cookie cutter approach, but being able to adapt to people's needs?
Very much so. You got it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm getting up to speed here.
You're good to go. You're okay.
Yeah. Okay. Should we press record? Oh yeah, no, we're already there.
Yeah, we're already there. I allowed it. So with regards to Intuitive Performance, we have some not new things, but some reoccurring things on the horizon coming up in September. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so what's going on in September? We have another edition of the Whole Person Leadership Core coming up. So that's one of our 3 flagship programs. We have the first one really helping, individual contributors who are stepping into management roles, step up their game and gain confidence from a leadership perspective. The one that we're hosting, I know you're the facilitator, so you know all about it, but it's our I think our 4th edition.
Yes, for the public cohorts. Yeah,
which is really exciting. I believe it was 2 years ago that we built this, or 3 years ago even.
Right.
And started offering it to organizations and how it's developed and supported leaders for so long. It's been really quite exciting and nice to hear about the impact that it's had.
Absolutely. I get goosebumps every time I think about it. And when I think about running or facilitating the cohorts, it's amazing because it's never the same. There's always different leaders at different, stages of their leadership journey and their discovery of who they are and their why for leadership. So it's always impactful for me as well. I'm continuously learning.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so the one in September, just to clarify, so I know that's our second kind of module, or not module, but kind of second program. So I think it's a little bit more geared towards, people managers who are maybe looking to step into more leadership roles. So looking at, practicing some of that accountability leadership, how do I get a team behind my vision, and really kind of honing in on those types of leadership models rather than the basics of management and leadership.
Yes, definitely. I wouldn't say basics. I'd say best practices, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I don't know. When I started managing people, it was like, yeah, I want to know the basics. Like, I gotta.
It's legit fair. That's a fair statement. I just like to pick at you. You know that.
Oh, I know that. I know that.
And the third level is emotionally intelligent leadership.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Super excited about this one because this gets into the depths and breadths of all the things, or what we would call soft skills, which we really feel are human skills, and ensuring that, you're leading your team members, meeting them where they're at from a place of curiosity, high levels of self-awareness. It's going to be jam-packed, full of fun things. But also, we feel very strongly about knowledge to action. So having evidence-based or backed information is really important to us. So we're super excited to launch that one as well.
Yeah. Anyone who I've talked to about it, I mean, it's hard not to get excited when you talk about emotional intelligence and leadership.
Right.
It's just such a foundation staple for organizations and for leaders that are able to do it well. So yeah, that's really cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I really enjoy about the cohorts, regardless of what level we're speaking to, is the knowledge and experiences that are brought into the room. And regardless of if we're doing it from a B2B, so we're working with one client, multiple leaders, or open cohorts, it's always really interesting to hear their experiences and different lenses around a particular topic. And that to me really creates the customized or group oriented approach that we know and love with our cohorts.
Okay. And so kind of, you know how I like to recap things.
You recap
flagship programs, offer them individually or to organizations. Yes. But what else? I know you're traveling to California in the fall.
I am. I'm really excited.
As well as to Washington.
Yes. So Washington is September. Yeah. So that's for a team chemistry offering for one of our clients. And then October is California, where it's a speaking engagement that also backs into team chemistry. So super excited. Traveling to Toronto in November to do the Weeby conference. So more networking in the sense of diversity as well as inclusion of women in business. And, we're continuing to grow. So looking to broaden our scope in the Georgia and surrounding state market. So we've been into Atlanta in June. I don't know if we talked about that the last time or not, but a lot of great things going on.
Yeah, it's exciting. All right, enough about Intuity.
All right, fine.
Let's jump into the topic here a little bit.
Okay.
What was it that, I know you and I kind of talked offline a little bit, thinking about different topics to bring to the podcast, and this one kind of came to the forefront. And so I wanted to kind of check in with you. What were your thoughts around it? What was it that kind of got you excited about talking about broken HR systems, for lack of a better term?
Being an HR practitioner myself in a past life, I think there's really opportunity for growth around how we're looking at our systems and our processes. Because oftentimes, regardless of what you're looking at, once it's built in HR, it's not looked at again. It's either one and done, or it's looked at rarely. So 3 to 5 years. Some policy per se may be looked at on an annual basis or based on legislation changes. So that in a nutshell started to get me thinking, as we move down the road of the coach approach and leadership and emotional intelligence, and how does that impact us? Scott, you and I have been talking a lot about how to connect with HR people and us help out and be their advocates to ensure that they're getting what they need in the sense of leadership development, or that coaching modality for their team members and the access of the same. And so I don't recall exactly if there was one absolute moment, but as we're talking to HR professionals, I had the epiphany that when it comes to HR policies, processes, and systems, they're written systematically. So they're written towards the culture of a company, which is great. I'm not poo-pooing on that. I'm not taking away from that. But what I am saying is that when you administer programs and policies, it's not all things equal all the time, regardless of if you're talking about it from a diversity perspective or from an accountability perspective or an emotional intelligence perspective.
Mhm.
Because if you're looking at things in black and white, you forget about the gray. And oftentimes when we're thinking about humans, there's a lot of things to unpack in these situations. So for example, if we're talking about performance and you have a performance process whereby they have quarterly meetings, they have objectives and numbers to hit. And if they don't hit them, then we're having a conversation. 9 times out of 10, where does that conversation come from a place of? What have you experienced?
For me, it's why are you hitting your goals? Or like thinking about it from that sense as to like the ownership is more on the person for not reaching objectives rather than possibly on the manager, possibly on the environment, possibly on some other support system they might need to actually be able to reach the objectives that have been set. And sometimes we said that, there's no accountability to the other person because I'd like to touch on the ownership as a
Definitely
contributor as well. And, you have to take ownership of, if you need help or if you need more support to raise your hand.
yes.
But if you're not given that environment to be able to thrive or those systems, those processes, it makes it that much more difficult to be able to show up and do your best work.
Absolutely. And to me, the loudest message is if you don't do your work, I'm going to judge you, and not in a great light.
Mm-hmm.
And so it automatically puts management employees at odds. And that's a natural tension that comes out around performance. And so there's this systemic feeling that you're going to the principal's office when you have to talk about your performance, when in actuality, to your point, Scott, it really should come down to accountability. So it's more around problem solving conversation. So if I'm a leader and I'm coming into these goal setting meetings or check-in meetings whereby, you're not meeting your targets for whatever may be, I'm going to ask some questions first to try to understand. And not from the perspective of, I'm going to send you an email and you need to respond to me and then we'll have a meeting. No, we're going to set the precedence that these meetings are two-way conversations so that you can lean into me as a resource, a sounding board, as well as, you understand that there's company policies and procedures. However, with those, I have the ability or the freedom to meet you where you're at. And that way it allows me to be okay with asking questions versus pushing doubt.
So I love that that response or that lane in terms of leading more with curiosity versus judgment. And I'm hearing almost two things here because I know we're talking a little bit about HR, or you started off talking a little more about HR systems and policies and how they show up. And for me, I know you have the experience when we talk about people and culture and human resources and everything else. For me, I don't have that type of experience. So I mean, if you were to talk to me a little bit like as a leader within an organization,
there's that lane, absolutely.
Probably feeling a little bit of the same way, a little bit of a disconnect as to, well, how is HR really supporting me in terms of helping support my team members and everything else? Can you speak to that a little bit more, just to, I guess, educate myself and maybe any other leaders out there that might be feeling the same?
Yeah, for sure. So I think what I'm hearing is, based on our standard processes, procedures, programs, how can I interact with my HR team so that I can feel confident that I'm supporting the company lane, but at the same time leading as my best self, I think is what I heard.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, we can touch on a little bit as to like, well, what are those HR processes and systems that could be influenced to be better to help support me that much more?
Okay.
Recognizing there's probably some gaps within my organization at the moment already.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start there. So I strongly believe that when it comes to adapting as a leader and accountability, it really starts from the beginning. So it's looking at your recruitment systems and what type of objectives or what type of freedoms and adaptations do management have to still make sure that they're following all labor standards laws, they're following all human rights laws, there's diversity and inclusion, of course, 100%, and equity at the same, but in the same breath for their department, if there's something different or a nuance that's going on there, Do they have the ability to ask those questions to support it and really hire for a quality fit? Then moving into systems like onboarding, it's the same thing. We know that organizations have a culture, but there's also subcultures. So are HR team influencing managers to really allow that subculture to come out? Or is it a systematic onboarding process? And then the team members just kind of feel it out organically to understand what their department's about, and then they can see differences in other departments. How do you lower those walls and really understand what is the culture, not just what's written in the policies or told to me from a structured onboarding perspective? To me, I think things like learning development, performance, and how we're training our leadership teams are the three largest buckets. So to speak to performance, typically speaking, it's an annual structure that's put into place, annual or fiscal, depending on company year. Some companies are looking at it still from a one-time performance review. Other companies might be doing it monthly, other companies quarterly. And then there's other ways to look at it in the sense of how you're rewarding performance, which is a totally other different type of topic and conversation. But that to say, again, the way that our performance systems are set up are employee, what can you give us? Versus the opportunity to see us to transition to more full or whole person conversations. What are you interested in, Scott? What projects do you really think you thrive at? Hey, there's training and development opportunities. I haven't heard from you yet. Do you remember we talked about the training and development policy? And what does that look like for you? And, I can kind of stand on a soapbox and go on for a few more moments, but you get where I'm going in the sense that oftentimes the way that leaders interpretate it, so it's not just HR, but it's how we interpretate the policies and programs, is very black and white versus how do I utilize these as a North Star or my flag post and adapt it to my team member with a coach approach, right? So we're humanizing these policies and procedures, or we're humanizing how we're leading. We're not going against anything. We're not operating outside the lines. No. But leadership and HR have the kind of either structured or unstructured agreement that there's no one shoe or one size that fits all in the sense of a department, because everybody has different individual needs, different education levels, different backgrounds, different baggage, et cetera, as well as behaviors. So that's kind of where I'm coming in at, in the sense that HR has the opportunity not just to be strategic. I think that's important, but HR has the opportunity to bridge the knowledge to action gaps when it comes to leadership, buying in and implementing either change processes or performance or onboarding, et cetera.
Okay. I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Very much so. It's a little thick.
Starting, I guess, kind of working backwards here, we talked a little bit about recruitment.
Yeah.
And the idea, if I recall correctly, the idea around that is, rather than having kind of standard recruitment process and job offers, rather allowing managers or leaders to actually put a little bit of their touch or flair to it, to a certain degree.
Yes.
Because different departments, different teams might have somewhat different needs or everything else. And ensuring that, a manager can look at that and say, oh yes, if I read this will attract the type of candidates that I would really be excited about working with. Now, flagging that there's a caveat here, when building out your team, you're not looking to have all the same people, right? There is diversity of thought, there is diversity of experience, there is diversity of working styles that can really create an amazing, high-functioning, high-performing team. So I've noticed even managers I've worked with, say things like, oh, if I can clone so-and-so, we just need 2 of them. Or even if I can just clone myself twice to make our team so much better. But the idea isn't necessarily cloning those that you have around you, because, well, let's be honest, having too many of them, definitely there'll be deficiencies that aren't being made up for. And so looking at being able to have, having, I guess, a mix of both there.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. The second piece we had talked about. This is what happens when I write things down. And it's like, oh, wait, so recruitment? Yeah. So I know we jumped ahead to performance. Why don't we talk a little bit about performance?
Okay.
And you talked a little bit about the idea that, the shift from performance being the sense I got was not so much like a time and place and saying this is what happens upon the year, but rather having an ongoing conversation. And yes,
Yes.
maybe it's important having those quarterly meetings that are actually dedicated performance reviews in the sense of being able to take that step back and look at things more clearly. But what does ongoing performance look like from a leadership perspective?
So to look at this in two lanes, what I'm hearing
Yeah.
is structured and unstructured performance conversations.
Yes.
And even within the structured performance conversations, I think it should be a two-way conversation all of the time.
Yeah.
So the only difference between the unstructured and structured is that you're a little bit more formal in the sense of you're filling out your form or you're documenting that conversation. Or if you have a scoring mechanism, then that's used midway through the year, etc. Other than that, I strongly believe that leadership has a responsibility to be opening up, not just have an open door policy for communication, but an open two-way dialect. And what I mean by that is, you're talking about, again, aspirations, what's working, what's not working, and the leader's actually listening. It's not about, well, we don't have budget, so figure it out. Or that's your responsibility, regardless of if you like it or not. Like, truly listen, because if we can open up that dialect a little bit further, you can always see trends in the sense of where that leader could look for efficiencies or argue or debate for more of a budget, or et cetera, et cetera. Further to that, I strongly believe that as leaders, we have the accountability to meet our team members where they're at. So let's just say it could be anywhere from an underperformer, what we would call in HR, all the way up to an overperformer. But regardless, we all have blind spots. And it could be technical blind spots. It could be behavioral or attitude or how we communicate blind spots.
Yeah.
As a leader, it's really important to be able to have that open dialect so that we can have accountability conversations, so that we can have curiosity conversations, fact-finding conversations, because it's a lot different if Ange goes into the office and says, hey, I'm frustrated with XYZ. We know the history of this. Here's why. Versus Ange just being, quote unquote, insubordinate and not doing that job task without having the conversation. Those are two totally different fields of conversations, right? Yeah. And the premier or the previous being that I feel secure in being able to talk to my leader. I feel psychologically safe. And I trust that when I do identify a deficiency or something that I'm not pleased about, that I'm heard, and not just heard and listened to, but I'm seen, meaning that we validate them, right? So the goalposts of these performance conversations, I strongly feel, shouldn't just be a transactional. It should have that human side of things. And for leaders, it's learning things like, the leader needs to be vulnerable, to be curious, right? The leader needs to be able to adapt. So, for example, within performance reviews that I've done in past, we've had what's called stretch goals or pivot goals. So if something goes sideways, in Nova Scotia here, we've had floods, we've had fires, everything but, some sort of other horrific pandemic has come down for us in Nova Scotia that impacts work. It impacts operations, it impacts people and their wellness, right?
Yeah.
So having a pivot goal is, if my work is disrupted or something goes off the rails or something I can't control, I'm not going to get a bad mark because of it, or a failed, or a black, X on my back, but rather it gives me an opportunity to forward think and agree with my leader. Okay, what's plan B? And sometimes what's plan C? And then those years that we have that superstardom, then it's okay, what does the next iteration of this goal look like? So taking a step back, even from having those performance conversations, Scott, I think it's really important that leaders show the value of two-way conversations in goal setting with their team members. Gone are the days that employees are going to accept, Scott coming into the office and being like, all right, Ange, here's your 5 goals. You need to do them. We're going to meet quarterly. You good with that?
I've tried it. It clearly didn't work. I mean, I don't know what happened, but luckily we're meeting virtually, because I feel like I would have gotten water to the face.
It went totally sideways, that conversation did, Scott. But I guess I know people can hear the passion in my voice around this because it's meaningful. Like this stuff really means a lot to team members. They don't, over 90% of the time, we know that team members get up and go to work because they want to be validated, or they want to do a good job, or they want to be seen and heard and contribute and have purpose. And as a leader, oftentimes we're bogged down by constraints around how we should do things within an organization versus how we can meet our team members where they're at.
Yeah, I think that was really well said.
Thank you.
A few things that really resonated for me was, talking about these performance conversations, what it really comes down to is more the environment you create outside of those conversations.
Yes.
And
definitely.
So, to the point, not trying to reiterate what you've said, but the point of being able to show vulnerability. If you expect that from your team, you got to be able to show it, no matter what it is. Whether it's vulnerability, whether it's two-way conversations, whether it's trust. How is your team supposed to trust you if you don't trust them?
Right.
And so, leading by example from that perspective can have a really big impact on how you show up and how your team shows up for you.
And I would add being able to have accountability conversations.
All right, let's make the shift towards accountability conversations. I feel like the podcast is being more around these types of performance and accountability conversations. I want to hear more.
So it's not so much performance. I think it's just how we show up in the workplace. And when it comes to accountability, I know that oftentimes we feel like it's a buzzword or the fad word of this season or year, etc. However, I strongly believe accountability should be part of culture. And what that means is if Ange misses the mark, then the conversation that she has with Scott is not like a carrot or stick conversation, but rather it's a curious conversation to be like, okay, how can we look at this differently? Or what's really getting in your way? Or, okay, thanks for letting me know. What are we going to do now? And what about the future based on our timelines? So really looking at accountability from the perspective of, again, it's a two-way street. I guess my definition of accountability in the workplace is from a leadership desk or an HR desk, it's a two-way street. So your team members are accountable, but your leaders are also accountable. And not that we're superimposing you're accountable versus I'm accountable. No. We're looking at accountability, knowing that we're trying to accomplish the same thing. So at the end of the day, it's really important for team members to understand how their goals or how their work impacts the department and the overall company. That makes it easier. Also unpacking the fact that when it comes to accountability, it almost trickles down, I would say, like your strategic plan. So with your strategic plan, it starts at the top, right? And then you break it down by department or division. And then you break it down by team, and then you break it down by individual. Well, accountability should mirror the same in the sense of how you're having those conversations at different levels throughout your organization, meaning that accountability rolls up as well as rolling down.
So I'm almost seeing two things here. And so you mentioned, leadership taking accountability. One thing that comes to mind for me is it's almost this idea, I'm going to try not to bastardize it, but this idea that, if your individual contributor, if your team member isn't performing the way that you need them to, well, a lot of that accountability actually might be on you in terms of how you're supporting them, in terms of the environment that you're creating.
Could be. Yeah.
So I think that's one piece. But what happens when you kind of take in that leadership position, you have a team member that you feel is missing the mark, but they don't see it that way. They feel like they are doing well. And now you're kind of stuck in this position that it's like, well, I want you to take ownership over what you're not doing well. I'm seeing it, but you're not. We're on the same page here,
right? I think having precedence or being able to set the stage so that you can take the ick out of accountability conversations. I think that's the biggest thing for me. In that, if you have trust and respect and that psychological safe workplace, you can have any type of conversation that you need to have. It may not be the best or the favorite one that you want to have, but it can be as easy, I shouldn't say as easy, as manageable as Ange saying to Scott, hey, Scott, I'm seeing a blind spot. Is now a good time to talk about it? You see, even though I'm the leader and I have a title, I'm asking for permission, not literally, Scott, but, figuratively. You get what I'm saying? In that, if that person says now is not a good time, then it's the leader's accountability to say, okay, well, let's schedule a different time. Meaning that we are going to have this conversation. And we're going to have it in a manner where we're seeking to look for understanding and a win-win at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's that old adage that you can only take someone as far as they want to go, right? There's context, there's what I would call HR common sense or leadership common sense that runs behind this. But generally speaking, people do want to strive to be better. And sometimes they generally have those blind spots. And so in short, I would say it comes down to 4 or 5 things. When it comes to accountability conversations and someone doesn't see that, it's asking for permission or setting the stage that you need to have that conversation in a respectful manner. And then it's diving in with curiosity. So again, you have to do some pre-work with your team members so that they don't feel like you're grilling them or putting them up on the stand. Because when you're coming from a place of curiosity, a lot of questions come out. So it's, hey, Scott, help me understand what's going on with the sales cycle. What do you think is working really well? What are areas of growth? And then that way the leader can really understand where that team member is coming from. That also answers the question about judgment. So instead of Ange filling in her own blanks, she's believing the words that Scott's telling her to fill in the blanks, right? Again, that trust. Yeah. And then from there, I would say when it comes to accountability conversations, it's talking about things from a pragmatic approach. So it's not how Ange feels. It's not feelings matter. Don't forget that. But it's not specifically how I feel because I'm not judging you. It's not specifically how I see it. I'm asking questions based on the facts. Because essentially what we want to do is we want to boil down where are the opportunities now. So that's what it's really about. It's not blaming someone for blind spots. It's looking for opportunities for growth. And when you look at it from that perspective, people become a lot less defensive and their innovative brain kicks in. They can be creative because they don't feel shrunken or they don't feel defensive. They feel heard and seen, and they're more apt to be accountable, to be like, you know what, I did drop the ball on that piece. In future, here's what I'm thinking. And they'll be even more proactive. So the leader doesn't have to feel like they're doing all of this work and dragging the team member along to get them where they need to be. Yeah.
No, I love that recap and kind of a bit of a prescriptive approach in terms of how to deal with that type of situation. I know we started off talking a little bit more from the HR lens and then kind of shifted towards leadership. I'm wondering, should we shift back towards the HR side of things? And, how can human resource or people and culture professionals maybe support leaders in this domain of performance conversations, accountability conversations, and things along those lines?
Love it. When you think about people and culture, a strong people and culture person or department, depending on if they're a one-person shop or a whole team, they have influence on all of those systems, programs, and outcomes that we've just talked about. Yeah. So what type of training and development offerings are within your workplace? What type of culture do you have around that? Are you systematically looking at your leaders from a skills matrix perspective? What's fitting with the culture, what's fitting with the job, and where they at, and how can you help them grow? All the way down to day-to-day conversations in helping leaders and or managers understand how they can administer the programs and policies from a place of vulnerability, accountability, and empathy.
So how do we turn the policy or the piece of paper to something that's not sitting in the drawer, but rather is exercised on a daily or regular basis?
Absolutely.
For the management team?
Definitely. And oftentimes it's how that people and culture person is explaining the administration of that policy is where the buy-in comes into play. Because if you just send out those policies and then email reminders and then remind them they have to do this and remind them what they're responsible about, that change management piece is just going to fall flat. I've seen it. I've done it. I've learned from it type thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would we shift away? Like, I have an idea around it, but I'd like to hear from you as to like how we shift away from just holding managers accountable through emails and through sending things out. How do we really show them the value of being able to leverage these kinds of systems?
I think that there's a few schools of thoughts of this, so I might touch on a few things, but it's ensuring that your people and culture team have connectivity with your leadership regardless of where they're at in the organization. So if they have to operate in a different manner, they have the autonomy to do so. So for example, if you have field staff and office staff, are you able to go out in the field and chat with your leadership team out there? Are you able to have one-on-ones with your leaders within the HR departments? Are you able to have group sessions with your leaders to talk about these type of things? Because it's really about the relationship building with your management team and your leadership team to be able to truly influence and have those fruitful conversations as the how to administer this type of stuff.
I almost noticed the same theme around, between the leadership and the individual contributor relationship or your manager's relationship there around, trust, two-way conversations, accountability conversations. The same thing you're looking for from the HR team to leadership and management.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so much that the people and culture team has power to do to be able to help support managers and leaders within an organization. The more trust and communication there is between them, the easier it makes it for the entire organization to function and perform at a higher capacity.
Definitely. And I mean, with the people and culture bias, I've been there. It sounds really easy, not always easy to implement, right? Because there's a million things, always priorities that are going on, fires that you have to feel like you have to put out, but ensuring that you're proactively making time for those connections with your leaders, I think is a first step. Also being able to let go of outcomes is a really strong skill set for HR around these systems and things, in the sense that you can do your best. But at the end of the day, timing might be off, budget might be off, or there may be something within the culture that requires further discovery for elevation.
Yeah, I think you touched on something important there, Ange, in the sense that, whether you're sitting in a people and culture seat or whether you're sitting in a leadership seat, at the end of the day, it takes time. It takes time to build trust. It takes time to build those relationships. And it's not a short-term goal that's going to be achieved. You have to have that long-term sight to be able to say that, hey, I have my list of priorities and it looks so overwhelming, but hey, Sally, yes, I'm going to take 10 minutes because I can tell you're struggling with something. I really want to hear you and see you to make sure that you feel engaged and are willing to show up and ensure you're well supported.
I'm smiling because there's been so many examples where I've had directors or C-suite or frontline managers come into my office and they're like, so-and-so needs to be fired. And I'm like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? And so obviously from a people and culture perspective, you have to gather your information, identify things. There's certain things you need to do and understand. All this to say, a common denominator thread is that when it comes to leadership, there's an opportunity for leaders to build more grit and resilience when it comes to mentoring and habit building with your team members. Again, I can't stress this enough. Over 90% of your team or your workplace wants to do a good job. You just need to have the patience to be able to mentor them and work through those habits. Because you said something really strong, or reiterated something really strong, Scott, that habits take time, like anywheres from 66 to 318 times before it goes from our short-term memory to something that is just automatically done, like driving a car. And so when I say this to leaders in our cohorts, or even from a coaching perspective, I get a lot of eye rolls because they know how much patience that they need to deploy to really be able to mentor the employee. And that's a definition of meeting your team member where they're at, right? Of course, there's different situations, contexts. It may not always work out that way. But generally speaking, you want to try to coach till you hit that proverbial wall.
Yeah, I love it. All right, Ange. It's been a good conversation.
It is, as always. Where do we go from here, Scott? How are we closing this out?
I don't know. How do we want to wrap up? What are some actionable key tips maybe our audience members can walk away from today's conversation, or some themes that you were pulling out from today?
Definitely. I think the first level around all of this for people and culture is to look at their systems and processes. And when you're looking at your stats, your turnover stats, your engagement stats, how does that allow you to strategically think around things like accountability and what type of autonomy there is with programs, processes, procedures? How well of a job are we doing, people and culture, with regards to creating those leadership relationships to ensure that you're deploying those processes properly, but not just tactically and systematically, but again, encompassing everything we just talked about today. The other thing that comes up for me on the flip side for leadership is sitting back and asking yourself and your team members, how am I viewed as a leader? Am I viewed as an accountable leader? Am I viewed as an inclusive or an empathetic leader? How do people see me? And it's okay to set the stage with your team members to be like, hey, I'm working on my leadership. What have you noticed about XYZ? So again, that you make it comfortable and you don't put people on the spot.
Yeah. If I can add one more to the leadership point that you mentioned is even just checking in as to, am I leading with judgment or curiosity?
Ooh,
I know that's
a
a question
good question.
that, like a self question that I find has been helpful, or whether it be for myself, even the coaching clients that I take on.
Yeah. I'd like to hear too, like, because I know we post our podcast on LinkedIn, Buzzsprout, and other downloadable apps, but for our socials, I'd love to hear from people. Are you leading from judgment or curiosity? I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say too.
Yeah, no, I love it, Ange. I think you've provided a lot of great kind of coach approach questions for team members. I know we actually have a guide that we put together that provides like top 10 coach approach questions from a management seat. Yeah. It's just for your employees. Let's get Jess to put that in the show notes so that our viewers have an opportunity to download that. Maybe it's an actual tip you can use on a day-to-day basis to help and support your team.
That's a great idea.
Awesome.
All right. As always, Mr. Scott, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ange, for having me again, and looking forward to catching up on the next one.
Yes. See you again soon.
All right. Take care. How can human resource or people and culture professionals maybe support leaders in this domain of performance conversations, accountability conversations, and things along those lines?
Love it. When you think about people and culture, a strong people and culture person or department, depending on if they're a one-person shop or a whole team, they have influence on all of those systems, programs, and outcomes that we've just talked about. Yeah. So what type of training and development offerings are within your workplace? What type of culture do you have around that? Are you systematically looking at your leaders from a skills matrix perspective? What's fitting with the culture, what's fitting with the job, and where they at, and how can you help them grow? All the way down to day-to-day conversations in helping leaders and or managers understand how they can administer the programs and policies from a place of vulnerability, accountability, and empathy.
So how do we turn the policy or the piece of paper to something that's not sitting in the drawer, but rather is exercised on a daily or regular basis?
Absolutely.
For the management team?
Definitely. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuity Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.